Prime Minister's vision of an Atmanirbhar Krishi. Now, I don't want to get into introducing Professor to us the strength, the wisdom, the affirmation of our civilizational thought and of our perennial scriptures. And on the other hand, he brings to us the rigor, the minute analysis, the succinct expression and articulation of policy making, and especially in the last 6 years of policy making that leads to the making of New India. We have had the good fortune in Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation of having his constant guidance, his support, and his unconditional support and direction in any policy initiative that we have undertaken in the past. Friends, I want to, before requesting Professor Bibek Debroy to deliver his special address, I want to make two observations. One is Prime Minister Modi spoke about the reform in the farm sector as a watershed. All of them to this discussion today. I would request, without much ado, I would like to request Professor Bibek Debroy to kindly address us on this very important topic of the day, to tell us what it is all about, and so that we can better understand this and become disseminators of the right narrative, disseminators of the narrative which is in line with India's national interest and which is in line with the vision of a new India. Thank you so much, Professor Bibek Debroy.
Good evening. It's always a pleasure and an honor to be invited to speak under the banner, under the umbrella of the Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation. In this medium that we are constrained to use now, it is somewhat difficult to recognize faces, but to the extent I can, I do recognize some familiar faces. I was a bit worried at seeing a turban, but I see that the turban is on a familiar head. So hello to all my friends and acquaintances. Dr. Ganguly asked me to talk about reforming the farm sector. There's been a lot of debate on the farm sector. There's been a lot of discussion on the farm sector. There's been a lot of commentary on the farm sector in the newspapers. So what is there that I bring to the table in terms of value addition? So therefore, I thought I would flag some issues normally don't think about, a little bit away immediate changes in statutes that have been done. Firstly, the share of agriculture. Share of agriculture in national income national income being defined as either gross domestic product, GDP, or gross value, GVA. The share of agriculture in national income is not that high. 14%, thereabouts, give or take 1 percentage point here or there, 14%. Share of agriculture will decline with development as it has in many other countries. But whatever trajectory we project in terms of the importance of industry and services in national income, it is unrealistic to presume that in the next 20 years or so, the share of agriculture in national income will drop to below 10%. But there's a share in national income and there is a share in employment. Roughly about 65% of the population lives in rural India. And one often tends to presume that people who work and live in rural India necessarily earn their living from agriculture. That's not quite correct. If one looks at the national sample, yes, the question the NSS asks is, what is your primary occupation? And when one says that 55% of the population earns a living from, please let us recognize that that is in response to that question, what is your primary source? Most people who live in rural India not only have a primary source of income in agriculture, they have a secondary source in other areas outside conventional agriculture. Let us also recognize that as the farm sector, as the agricultural sector modernizes, there will be a greater emphasis on food processing, trade, transportation. Purely the national income accounts point of view, any impetus that food processing, trade, transportation, even if that is of agricultural produce, any impetus these other sectors receive will lead not to a contribution of agriculture in national income, but to a contribution of sometimes industry and more often than not services in national income. We are in the midst, despite COVID, we are in the midst of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals have one particular, everyone listening in knows that the SDG structure.
Please, Amit Yadav, kindly keep yourself muted.
Everyone listening in knows that the SDGs has a targets and indicators. And one of these is on reducing food and food waste. There is a important difference between food loss and food waste. Food loss is what we are typically concerned with in so-called developing countries like. What is food loss? Food loss is loss that happens in production, post-harvest at processing and distribution. In other words, food loss is what happens before the product reaches the final consumer. Whereas food waste is what happens when that food is wasted by the consumer. We often tend to think that there is no food waste in the world. Not at all true. In the developed countries, such as the United States, there is a tremendous amount of food waste. And in the process of development, it's almost as if one transits from food loss to food waste. But as I said, we are concerned mostly with food waste, food loss. Why is there food loss? There is food loss because there is a long chain between the farm and the fork. There is a long chain between the farm and the fork, and at every stage of the chain, there is a loss. Because of the sustainable development goals, because of the emphasis placed on food loss in the sustainable development goals, there have been studies done in various countries on what kind of food loss happens. And now I'm talking about global figures. This depends on the crop, largely global. At the moment, I'm talking about global. In terms of the crop categories where food loss is maximum, right at the top, we have roots and tubers. Below that, we have fruits and vegetables. Below that, we have meat and animal products, and right at the bottom, we have cereals and pulses. So let me repeat that. Right at the top, roots and tubers. Below that, fruits and vegetables. Below that, meat and animal products, and right at the bottom, cereals and pulses. In India, this is the point. In India, wait people I think
request everyone to please keep yourselves muted. Yes, Professor Debroy.
This is important. In India, invariably interpreted agricultural policy as a rice and wheat policy, and I will come back to this again. As Indian agriculture moves away from a rice and wheat policy, as the Indian farmer moves away from rice and wheat, as there is greater commercialization and there is greater diversification, note what I said earlier, that the food loss issue becomes even more important. One is moving away from cereals and pulses, one is moving towards meat and animal products, one is moving towards fruits and vegetables, which global figures suggest are much more susceptible to food loss and are therefore much more susceptible to the problem that I mentioned of intermediation and inefficient intermediation of that chain from farm to fork. I gave you global indications, but there are figures that have been also done for India on the extent of this farm loss. Such exercises started in 1962. The last robust one I have seen is something that was done by the Indian Council of Agricultural Research in Ludhiana, and this was done, if I recall correctly, for agricultural research. It was a Ludhiana study. If I recall, it was in the year 2012. So let me quickly give you some figures of the extent of this food loss that we are talking about. cereals, these are